Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to be back at Herzliya. At this point in my career, I should know enough not to try to follow Abe Foxman on a panel, but unfortunately I haven't learned my lesson. I want to talk to you in part about an email I got a few months ago from a friend in high school. And he sent me a picture taken of our 11th grade class. And people who had gone on to great things even had links under the picture with what people happened and who made $1 million with Google and who made $1 million with Yahoo and who became a lawyer and who became a doctor. And I clicked on one of the links and I saw a picture of a guy, sort of athletic, toothy grin, beautiful wife. And it was this guy named Andy. Now, Andy in high school did a lot of drugs. He went to a lot of Rolling Stones concerts. He went to Rolling Stones concerts when he was on drugs. And the story that everybody remembered about Andy in high school is the English teacher was going through a lesson and teaching a novel, and about 10 minutes late, the door opens, and Andy silently shuffles in. And he sits down, he stares ahead, and class falls silent. And the teacher looks at him and says, "Andy, where were you?" And Andy pauses, and he looks up, and he says, "When?" Now, we all laughed because we all knew exactly where Andy was, but Andy in his head was sort of swimming around with all the things he was thinking about, all the things that were going on, all the things that happened outside the door and inside the door. Andy had no idea where he was. And I feel a little bit like Andy today, right? Because when the Passover Seder talks about the 4 sons, what happens to the confused son? What about the son who can't figure out where the heck he is? I'm that son because I was asked to talk not really about what the title is, which is the future of the Middle East and global challenges, but the note I got from Tommy was, please give a historical and strategic overview of the evolution of the Middle East and its possible directions. And then yesterday I said, by the way, you have 12 minutes. I'm Andy. And even to figure out what's happened in the last 3 years in the Middle East, it's been a whirlwind, but to think about the last 100 years in the Middle East is hard, and nobody understands how hard that is more than Israelis who've had a front row seat to all of the changes, to all of the turmoil of the last century. I think that out of Israel's journey through the last century is actually a useful framework to understand the region's journey in the last century and where the region is going, what the region has to work through in the coming years. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Some of these issues, some of the challenges of Israel aren't Middle East specific at all. And they're not specific to Israel, they're not specific to the surrounding countries. Every state struggles to provide security. Increasingly, states everywhere in the world have as much of a problem with internal security as external security. The rise of non-state actors, the democratization of destruction that we see everywhere is a global trend. And that is felt in the Arab world, it's felt in Iran, it's felt in Turkey as much as it's felt in Israel, and states have developed strategies to deal with it. Corruption and good governance is a global problem. And the fact that there are so many former Israeli officials in jail is actually a sign that Israel is forcing accountability on this system in a way that many other states don't yet do. But that same problem of how do you get a government that can provide an increasingly sophisticated set of services to a population that is increasingly demanding is a global problem. And the problems that Israel has in that regard are universal. But I think there are several issues which are actually more specific to the Middle East, that Israel has dealt with these and other states have to deal with it as well. The first is the question of what's the nation? In some cases, why is the nation? Why is the nation here? I mean, this is not exclusive to Israel at all, although Israel has grappled with this problem since the founding of the Zionist movement more than a century ago. How do you differentiate between citizens and non-citizens? What's the basis to become a citizen? What's the role of non-citizens? What's the purpose of the state, if any? I think a lot of states in the Middle East have an unusual need to create a national history, because for many states in the Middle East there is no natural national history. Some states like Egypt and Iran do have a history, but other states, Syria, Iraq, Algeria, it has to be cobbled together. And many times the real shaper of the modern nation is not so much the ancient history, but the colonial history, which provides a very unsure foundation on which to build the future of the country. So we talked about what and why is the nation. Who is the nation? Who is the nation? Who is a citizen? What are the responsibilities of the citizens to the state? There are lots of minorities throughout the Middle East, not just in Israel. There are large diasporas in the Middle East. Countries like Morocco have ministers for expatriate affairs. It's not only the Palestinians with a large diaspora in the region. There are many states with large diasporas who affect the domestic politics. More Lebanese citizens, of course, live outside of Lebanon than inside of Lebanon. And so this issue of managing in the world is a common problem. And then this question of, so what do I owe in return for my citizenship? You know, this issue of the Haredim and the role of the Haredim in serving in the military and paying taxes and taking welfare and all those things, that is actually a broad problem. Not a problem, broad challenge in the region. In the wealthier Gulf states, as many of you know, there is a presumed entitlement to employment. 90-some-odd% of the national workforce works for the government. Even in Egypt, a poor state, a quarter of the population is on the public payroll. A quarter of the population. So this sense when you try to figure out what is the state about? Is the state about you give me resources, I give you loyalty, I tolerate you? I think that question of what do we get for our citizenship, what do we have to do for our citizenship, a question which I know is a very rich discussion in Israel, is actually a discussion in the rest of the world, the rest of the region as well. Israel has this incredible history of integrating diverse populations, and the waves of Aliyah and trying to teach everybody Hebrew and Ulpan and everything else, strangely does have a lot of resonance in the rest of the region, not so much because people crossed borders, but because people came from countrysides into cities. And just as Israel had the experience, especially in the 1950s, with many of the Mizrahim who came in and not only didn't speak Hebrew, but they didn't know how to live in an apartment. That process is a process which is going on in the mega cities of the Middle East, of the Arab world, every single day. Police have to explain to people, no, please don't sacrifice the sheep for Eid al-Adha on your balcony. But people still sacrifice the sheep for Eid al-Adha on the balcony. These issues of how do you create and how do you bring minorities in and how do you teach them the language. One of the challenges in Iraqi Kurdistan is the diminishing number of Kurds who speak any Arabic. These linguistic divisions perpetuate in the region and question this whole issue of national identity. The last thing I want to talk about is this issue, very well known to Israelis, of religion and politics. Religion and politics, I think, is especially salient for Israel and in the Arab world and in Iran because of the way that Judaism and Islam are constructed, the way Jewish law and Islamic law are constructed. Christianity grew up in the shadow of the Roman Empire. There's already a civil code, there's a criminal code. You didn't have to construct a code to deal with everything in life. But in fact, in Judaism, the religion of a state, Islam, the religion of a state, you do have extensive civil law, you do have extensive criminal law. There are people who say, yes, the purpose of the state should be to be the manifestation of our religious belief. And you have other people who say, absolutely not, we should have a secular state, we should just leave it to the side. And you have people who say, well, it should be inspired by religion, but distinct from religion. And these debates are quite vibrant. I think Israel is not only a sign of just how vibrant these debates can be, but how much these debates can shift over time. And those of us who've been watching Israel, and I'm sure you have, many of you have been watching Israel much closer than I have for a much longer time. But the issue of religion and politics in Israel has changed dramatically over the last 30 years and certainly since the founding of the state. In the region, we also see changes. If this conference, if we were meeting a year ago and we were talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, there would be a presumption that the Muslim Brotherhood represented a sort of middle road Islamist course with secularists on the left and Salafis on the right. And there was a presumption a year ago that the Muslim Brotherhood probably represented the mainstream of what most populations in the Middle East wanted, and whether you liked it or not, that would likely color the shape of politics and religion in the Middle East. In less than a year, we've seen that whole presumption reversed. And now we see secularists and Salafis aligned to marginalize the Brotherhood. I think what that tells us is that none of these issues have permanent answers. They have an evolving way of dealing with each other. One of the things that may surprise many of you who probably spend less time in the Arab world and talking to Iranians than I do, and I spend a fair bit of time in the Arab world and talking to Iranians, is the extent to which people throughout the region actually follow Israeli politics pretty closely. Most governments have a fair cadre of people. There are a number of journalists, and they read Israeli newspapers online, they watch Israeli television. They actually pay a fair bit of attention to how Israel works, and they think about the applicability of the Israeli model for how they do things themselves. There are a number of Iranians, and they would never say this publicly, but they think about the role of the clerical establishment in Israel, and they think about the role of the clerical establishment in their country, and they say, no, it would be nice to get a little more of that here. And I think that role of Israel providing answers to the dilemmas of the region is something that I think Israelis are not always completely aware of. I think Israel helps us think through what success in resolving some of these issues looks like, but Israel also reminds us that success doesn't mean the problems have gone away. Success means that you found some sort of dynamic, some way of containing the problems so they don't destroy you. We've talked about these problems. We've talked about the what issue. What is the country? Why is the country? Who is in the country? What are the responsibilities of people to their societies? How you integrate all these different people into a single society, and what the role of in religion and politics is. And then I think back to this smiling picture of Andy. What's behind the smiling photo? Is he the success that he appears to be, or have there been setbacks along the way? Does he wrestle with inner demons all the time? I suspect the answer to all these questions is yes. There's no point when these issues cease to be a challenge. The point here is about the journey and not the destination. We have to judge these things not in absolute terms, but rather in terms of the distance that's been traveled. Thank you very much.